The airport was filled with the usual sound of rolling suitcases, boarding calls, and excited chatter. It was a bright morning, and families, business travelers, and vacationers were getting ready to fly. Among them was a quiet 12-year-old girl, sitting near gate 22, holding her small backpack tightly. Her name was Lena. She wasn't loud or attention-seeking, just a calm and observant girl with bright eyes that noticed everything. She was traveling with her uncle, who had taken her on this trip as a reward for finishing top of her school. Her mother was a nurse and had to stay behind because of an emergency shift. Her father was no longer in the picture, and Lena didn't talk much about him. The flight was scheduled to take off at 9:30 a.m. It was a commercial passenger plane carrying 200 people, including babies, elderly travelers, and a crew of trained professionals. To everyone, it seemed like a regular flight, just another journey through the sky. But destiny had planned something no one expected. As the boarding announcement echoed through the hall, Lena and her uncle stood up and joined the line. She looked at the plane through the big airport window and whispered, "One day I'll fly one of those." Her uncle chuckled and said, "Dream big, little captain." She smiled but said nothing more. She had always been fascinated with flying, not just as a child's wish but with real curiosity. She watched documentaries, read books, and even had a flight simulator app on her tablet. Once inside the plane, they took their seats in row 18, right in the middle of the aircraft. Lena took the window seat and stared out as the ground crew moved around like tiny ants. The engines roared, and soon the plane was in the sky, climbing higher with each passing second. For the first hour, everything was normal. The flight attendants served drinks. Passengers watched movies or slept. Lena was flipping through a notebook, drawing small planes and writing short notes about control panels. Her uncle listened to music with his eyes closed. Everyone was relaxed, unaware of what was coming. At the front of the plane, the pilot and co-pilot were managing the controls. Both were experienced and had flown this route many times. The sky was calm and the autopilot was doing most of the work. The pilot leaned back, stretched his arms, and suddenly stopped moving. His co-pilot turned toward him and noticed something was wrong. The pilot had collapsed in his seat, his face turned pale, and his hands dropped from the controls. The co-pilot shouted for help through the intercom. Medical emergency in the cockpit. The flight attendants rushed to the front while the co-pilot struggled to manage both flying and checking on his partner. Panic slowly started to rise among the crew. A passenger with medical experience came forward and confirmed that the pilot had likely suffered a severe heart issue. He was unconscious and his pulse was weak. The co-pilot was now alone, trying to fly the plane and deal with the situation at the same time. In row 18, Lena looked up when she heard the voice over the speaker. She couldn't hear the full message, but something about the tone made her feel uneasy. She noticed the flight attendants whispering more than usual, their movements faster, more nervous. Her uncle was still resting with his eyes closed, unaware. Then came the announcement that shook everyone on board. The co-pilot's voice, tense but steady, said, "We are experiencing a medical emergency involving one of our crew. Please remain calm. We are working to resolve the situation." Passengers started whispering. Some were visibly scared, others just looked confused. A mother held her baby tighter. An elderly man tightened his seatbelt, and Lena? She sat still, breathing slowly, thinking clearly. Something inside her clicked, like a quiet voice telling her this was not a moment to freeze but to focus. She quietly took out her tablet, opened her flight simulator app, and stared at the screen. She had flown this same model in her game dozens of times. She knew the buttons, the layout, the emergency protocols, not perfectly, but better than most adults. Just then, a flight attendant walked down the aisle asking if there was anyone with flight training. Lena raised her hand halfway but hesitated. She was just a kid. Who would take her seriously? But something in her told her not to ignore the moment. She raised her hand fully this time and called out, "I know how to fly. I can help." The flight attendant looked surprised and unsure. "Are you serious, sweetheart?" she asked. Lena nodded and showed her the app, the diagrams and the notes she had been writing. Her tone wasn't proud or playful, it was focused and calm. The kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing. The flight attendant stared for a moment, then spoke into her radio. I think we have someone who might be able to help." Lena stood in the narrow aisle as nervous eyes followed her every move. The flight attendant beside her held a walkie-talkie tightly, still not sure if this was the right decision, but time was running out. The co-pilot had sent another urgent message. "I need assistance now, someone." Anyone who knows the layout of this aircraft, passengers began whispering more loudly. A few laughed awkwardly, thinking it was a joke. Others simply stared in disbelief. Could a 12-year-old really make a difference inside a cockpit? Lena didn't answer anyone. She just looked ahead, focused, calm. Her tiny steps moved forward like they were pulled by purpose, not fear. When she reached the cockpit door, the co-pilot opened it with a mix of relief and confusion on his face. He expected an off-duty pilot or retired Air Force officer, not a schoolgirl with messy braids and a tablet in hand. "You're the one they sent?" he asked, his voice half in shock, half in desperation. Lena simply nodded and showed him her screen. "I know this plane model," she said. "I've flown it in simulations 100 times." The co-pilot looked back at the unconscious pilot slumped in his seat, then at the blinking control panel, warning lights starting to flash. "Come in," he said finally, pulling the extra seat for her. "Sit down and just tell me everything you know." Lena sat straight, her hands gripping the edges of the seat. "This is a Boeing 737 MAX, right?" she asked. Yes," the co-pilot replied, surprised. "Good," she said, pointing to the overhead panel. "APU's active, fuel's balanced, flaps are fine. What's the current altitude?" He told her, and she began matching the data with her memory of procedures from the simulator app. The co-pilot stared at her, slowly realizing she wasn't just playing pretend. She spoke with confidence, clarity, and care. Her instructions weren't orders, just calm reminders. "Check the thrust levers, there's a slight drift in airspeed," she said softly. "And don't forget to adjust the heading to avoid that thundercloud ahead." Meanwhile, outside the cockpit, fear had turned to shock. Some passengers peeked up the aisle. Others held hands. A mother cried softly, whispering prayers. No one could see what was happening behind the locked cockpit door. But a story was unfolding that would echo far beyond this flight. Inside, Lena kept guiding the co-pilot through systems check, emergency procedures, and adjustments. She didn't touch the controls, she wasn't allowed, but she knew where every button led. Every beep and light meant something to her, and she translated that knowledge into calm support. "Have you ever landed a plane?" the co-pilot finally asked. His hands were steady again, but his voice carried the weight of what was ahead. Lena shook her head. "Not in real life," she said. "But in the simulator, I've done it in storms, engine failure, even water landings." He smiled faintly for the first time. "Well," he said, "today might be your first real one. They contacted air traffic control." The co-pilot explained the situation quickly, carefully leaving out the part about the 12-year-old helping him. But the control tower was already alert. News of the mid-air medical emergency had been relayed to nearby airports. A landing strip was being cleared as minutes passed. The co-pilot began to trust her more and more. He followed her memory of step-by-step landing protocols. Cross-checking with the manual, she wasn't guessing. She was recalling, repeating what she had studied again and again out of passion, not training. Then came a sudden jolt. The plane tilted slightly. Turbulence hit hard, a baby cried, passengers screamed. Lena held her breath. "Stay level, adjust vertical speed," she whispered. "We're still good." The co-pilot did exactly what she said, and the plane steadied again. "Good call," he said. Lena exhaled slowly and gave a small nod. Below them, emergency vehicles were lining up at the airport, sirens ready, lights flashing. Rescue teams didn't know who was in the cockpit, but they were preparing for the worst and hoping for the best. Lena took a moment and looked out the cockpit window. The sky was still bright, but her heart was racing, not with fear, but something else, responsibility, hope, and a strange feeling she couldn't name. The co-pilot gave her one final look. "We're beginning descent," he said. "You with me?" Lena smiled all the way. The cabin was filled with silence, the kind that makes even a whisper sound too loud. 200 lives were suspended in the air, unaware that their safety now partly rested in the hands of a 12-year-old girl who wasn't even tall enough to touch the cockpit pedals. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot adjusted the radio and spoke to the tower. His voice was calm on the outside, but his hands betrayed him. They trembled every time he reached for a control. Lena noticed this but said nothing. She didn't want to distract him. Instead, she kept her eyes on the screens, watching every altitude change, every flicker of warning light, every pitch and roll of the aircraft. "You okay?" the co-pilot finally asked. Not looking at her, Lena nodded. "Yeah," she whispered. "I just want everyone to go home safe." Below them, the airport had switched into emergency mode. Runways were being cleared, fire trucks positioned near the strip. Medics stood ready with stretchers. They still didn't know that the second brain behind the controls belonged to a child. Back in the passenger cabin, worry had turned into quiet dread. People weren't screaming anymore, they were waiting, hoping, a few praying. One man clutched a photo of his daughter. An elderly woman whispered something to herself in another language, and Lena's uncle, now fully awake, kept asking the flight crew what was going on. But they didn't have a clear answer, just rehearsed lines and tight smiles. The co-pilot leaned back slightly inside. "Flaps at 5, he said. Lena glanced at the speed and altitude. "Speed's a little fast for this approach," she said. "Might want to go flaps 10 instead. Slow us sooner." He blinked, surprised again, then nodded and did exactly that. It was easy to forget that the voice guiding him belonged to someone who wasn't even old enough to enter high school. Her tone was gentle but clear, not arrogant, not afraid, just honest and focused, and that's what made it powerful. Suddenly, a loud beep echoed through the cockpit, a sensor warning. "Wind shear alert," the screen flashed. "Turbulence ahead, dangerous wind currents." The co-pilot tightened his grip on the yoke. Lena leaned forward. "If we drop nose up slightly and add throttle." "Don't overcorrect," the plane shook. Passengers screamed again. Overhead bins rattled. A baby started crying, then just as quickly, the shaking stopped. The aircraft leveled again. "You're doing great," Lena said. "We're still on the glide path." The co-pilot gave a shaky laugh. "You're the calmest co-pilot I've ever had." The runway was now visible on the horizon, a straight line carved into the earth. Lined with blinking lights, the final approach was beginning. The hardest part was still ahead, bringing the massive plane down safely. "Gently and in one piece, landing gear down," said the co-pilot. Lena checked the indicator light. 3 green, she confirmed. "Gear is good." He looked at her again, really looked, and saw not a child, but something else, someone brave, someone brilliant, someone who shouldn't have been there and yet somehow belonged. The cockpit voice recorder captured every sound, every calm word Lena spoke. Someday, people would listen to it and shake their heads in disbelief, but right now none of that mattered. What mattered was that a plane with 200 lives was descending fast, and there was no second chance. Outside, the wind howled slightly, and a layer of fog began to gather near the runway. Lena noticed it first. "Visibility dropping," she said. "Stay on instruments, don't trust your eyes." The co-pilot trusted her more than he trusted the view outside. He focused on the gauges, adjusted the throttle, and aligned the nose of the plane with the center line of the runway. Then came the countdown in his head, 500 feet, 300 feet, 100 feet. Lena held her breath. Her small hands clenched her knees, not out of fear, but focus. "Ease off the throttle," she said softly. "Hold it. Now flare." The co-pilot gently pulled back the yoke, and the plane's nose tilted up slightly. A soft bump, then another. The wheels touched the ground. The plane bounced once, then steadied. They were down. The wheels screeched softly against the runway, not violently, just enough to say, "We're home." The aircraft slowed quickly as the co-pilot engaged the reverse thrust. The roar of the engines echoed across the tarmac. Inside the cabin, a strange thing happened. No one clapped. No one cheered, not yet. Instead, there was just a deep, collective breath. It was as if 200 hearts had been holding their final hope inside their lungs, and now, finally, they let it go. Lena remained seated beside the co-pilot, her back straight, her face calm, but her fingers were still shaking slightly. She had done everything she could without touching the controls. She had become a voice of direction in chaos, a mind steady in a storm, but now she felt the weight of it all pressing down. "Nice job, Captain," the co-pilot said. Breaking the silence, Lena looked at him and smiled nervously. "I didn't land it," she whispered. He shook his head. "You helped me land it right." The plane rolled to a slow stop near the emergency response zone. Outside the windows, flashing lights painted the night with red and white glows. Fire trucks stood by. Ambulances parked in rows. Emergency crew rushed toward the aircraft with stretchers. Equipment and unsure faces. The doors were opened quickly, and medical staff entered the plane. They moved straight to the cockpit and saw the pilot, still unconscious but stable. He was lifted carefully onto a stretcher and taken out. None of them noticed Lena at first. She stood behind the co-pilot's seat, smaller than everyone, quieter than most. But she had seen it all, felt it all, and helped change everything. As passengers began to leave their seats, the silence broke one by one. They stood up, some in tears, others shaking. They looked around to understand what had just happened. No announcements were made, but whispers spread. Someone had seen the little girl go into the cockpit. Someone else had overheard the crew mention a child co-pilot. By the time Lena walked out of the cockpit with her uncle beside her, a path had cleared. Every passenger turned to look at her. Some gasped, others covered their mouths. One woman simply whispered, "It was her." Then the clapping started. Slow at first, then louder. Not wild applause, but something deeper. A kind of respect not often shown to a child. Lena didn't wave, she didn't smile wide. She just nodded politely, her eyes scanning the floor. She wasn't proud, she was processing. Airport staff tried to escort them quietly, but reporters had already arrived. The story had traveled faster than the landing itself. "Child helps land plane," one cameraman said. "Girl saves 200 lives," another repeated. But Lena didn't stop for cameras. Her uncle held her hand tightly and kept walking. He had tears in his eyes and hadn't said much since she came out of the cockpit. He had always known she was bright, but today, he saw something else, something rare at a quiet corner in the terminal. They were asked to wait. An airline official approached, serious and unsure how to speak. "We'd like to thank her personally," he said, "and understand exactly what happened up there." The co-pilot joined them minutes later. Still in uniform, still shaken but smiling now. He told the official everything, how she had guided him with calm advice, how she knew the systems, the layout, even emergency procedures. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't make it a tale, he just told the truth, and she was like, "A voice from a training video, but real," he said. "I wouldn't have held it together without her." Lena sat silently through it, sipping juice from a paper cup. No one pressured her, no one asked stupid questions. There was a kind of sacredness in the air, the kind that surrounds someone who has done something incredible without asking for praise. Before leaving, a nurse came over and gently checked Lena's hands. "They're freezing," she said softly. "You okay, sweetheart?" Lena nodded. "Just tired," she replied. "Can we go home now?" The nurse smiled. "You've more than earned it." By the next morning, the world had changed for Lena. She didn't wake up in her own bed. She woke up in a hotel room arranged by the airline. Her uncle sat beside her, scrolling through his phone. His face lit up with a strange mix of worry and pride. Lena rubbed her eyes and stretched, unaware that her name was already trending worldwide. "You're everywhere," her uncle said quietly. Turning the screen toward her, she saw her picture on news sites. Headlines screaming things like, "12-year-old hero saves 200 lives," and "Tiny co-pilot with a big brain." Videos of passengers sharing what they saw were being aired on TV. Some people spoke with tears in their eyes, others with disbelief. Everyone had a version, but all of them circled around one truth. Lena had made the impossible feel real. She sat there silently, reading a comment someone posted under one of the stories. It said, "She's just a kid. There's no way this is true." Another one read, "If this really happened, that girl deserves to be in NASA." And then another, "Why are we not teaching this kind of calm and knowledge in schools?" Lena didn't know how to feel. She had never liked attention. She was used to being the girl in the back row, the one who read during lunch breaks and built paper planes from notebook pages. Now, people who had never met her were talking about her like she was some kind of miracle. Later that day, they were taken to the airline's main office for a debriefing. Officials, pilots, and even a representative from the aviation authority were there. They didn't sit her down like a child. They invited her to the table like she belonged. And maybe for the first time, she felt like she did. They asked her how she knew so much. She told them about her flight simulator app, the books she read, the videos she studied. She didn't have formal training, just passion, pure and undistracted. The kind of passion that made her notice small things others ignored. The kind that kept her up at night wondering what all the buttons in a cockpit did. One of the older pilots leaned forward. "You memorized the emergency checklist?" Lena nodded slowly. "I practiced it until I didn't have to think." The room fell quiet for a second. Then the pilot leaned back and smiled. "That's more than I can say for some trainees." By evening, the airline held a press conference. They hadn't planned to make Lena speak, but reporters kept asking for her. She was nervous at first, standing behind a curtain with her uncle squeezing her hand. But when she stepped onto the stage and saw the cameras, something unexpected happened. She didn't freeze. "I didn't land the plane," she said clearly. "The co-pilot did. But I tried to help him stay calm and follow the right steps." She looked down for a moment, then added, "I only wanted everyone to go home safe." That sentence was enough. The room fell silent again. Reporters lowered their cameras slightly. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Not with pride or drama, but honesty. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. Later, she was given a medal of recognition by the aviation board. They called her a civilian hero, the youngest person ever to be included in their archives. People cheered, camera flashes went off. The applause was loud, but Lena didn't smile wide or cry. She simply bowed her head and whispered, "Thank you." That was her way, quiet, humble, and full of strength no one saw until the sky called her name. The medal rested inside a velvet box on the nightstand. Lena didn't touch it, she just stared at it. To others, it was a symbol of courage, of brilliance, but to her, it felt heavy, like something that didn't fully belong to her. Her uncle was in the next room, speaking with a documentary team. They had come from another country, wanting to turn her story into a film. Big names were being mentioned, streaming platforms offering deals, but Lena sat quietly on the hotel bed, her legs crossed, sketching small planes in her notebook like she always had. She had saved 200 lives, and yet she still felt like the same girl from a quiet street, with a dream too big for her age. She wasn't used to reporters or flashing cameras. She wasn't used to strangers calling her a national treasure. And most of all, she wasn't used to carrying people's expectations. A child who helped land a plane wasn't just a child anymore. She had become a symbol. And that symbol came with a spotlight she never asked for. She had interviews booked for the rest of the week. Airline companies, tech firms, even pilot schools had reached out. Some offered scholarships, others sent expensive gifts. But Lena kept asking one question that no one could really answer. What happens now? Because after all the applause fades, after the articles stop being written, what happens to a girl who stood in the sky and now must return to a school desk? Her mother arrived that night, having taken a break from her hospital job. The reunion was soft, not loud. Her mother didn't cry, she just hugged her tight. "I was scared," she whispered, "but I'm proud." "Too." Lena nodded against her shoulder, finally feeling safe again. Not because of the media or the medals, but because her mother smelled like home. That night, she asked her mom, "Do I have to keep talking about it?" Her mother sat down beside her and held her hand. "No," she said gently. "You already did more than enough. But," she added, "if you ever want to talk, you can, on your terms." Lena breathed deeply. For the first time in days, not as a hero, not as a guest of honor, just as a 12-year-old girl who had done something extraordinary and was still trying to understand why the world had changed around her. The next morning, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived, handwritten, folded neatly, no logo, no envelope. It had been passed quietly by one of the ground staff who had helped with the emergency landing. Lena opened it slowly and read, "Dear Lena, you don't know me, but I was sitting in seat 24B. I was flying to see my daughter for the first time in 3 years. I never believed in miracles until that day, but now I do. You may think you were just helping, but to some of us, you became the reason we saw our families again. Thank you. A grateful father." Lena folded the note and held it close to her chest. No headline, no camera, no award had meant as much as those simple words, because they reminded her that she didn't just help fly a plane, she brought people home. Later that evening, she and her mother took a walk outside the hotel. No cameras followed them this time. They strolled past a small park where children were playing. One little girl pointed and said, "Mom, that's the flying girl." Lena smiled and waved gently. The little girl waved back with wide eyes, then ran off laughing. To her, Lena wasn't a hero, she was something better. A reminder that even a young girl could rise above fear. Even a quiet voice could guide through chaos. That night, as Lena lay in bed, she finally touched the medal. She didn't lift it high, didn't wear it, she just whispered, "Thank you." Not to herself, not to the world, but maybe to the sky itself for choosing her just this once. Weeks passed since the day Lena's name circled the skies. The headlines had slowed down, the cameras had moved on, but something inside her had quietly shifted. The girl who once dreamed of flying in silence was now the girl who had touched the sky and helped guide others safely back to Earth. She returned home to her regular street, her simple room, and her school filled with curious eyes. Some classmates greeted her with shy admiration, some with loud applause. But Lena didn't carry herself like a celebrity. She returned with the same quiet steps, the same soft smile, because she didn't want to be remembered for just one day. She wanted to live a life that mattered every day. Her teachers gave her space, letting her ease back into the rhythm of school. But during break time, students would sneak glances, hoping she'd share more about the plane one day. A younger boy from another class walked up to her with a paper airplane in his hand. He held it out and said, "I want to fly like you one day." Lena took the paper plane gently, adjusted one of the wings and smiled, "Then start learning now." She wasn't chasing fame, but opportunities found her anyway. A scholarship was offered by a top aviation academy for when she grew older. One pilot school even invited her to sit in a real simulator and test her skills under supervision. She sat in the same kind of cockpit she had once seen only on a screen. This time it was real. The switches clicked. The engine hum was deep, and the instructors watched in awe as her small fingers danced over the instruments with purpose. "This girl," one of the trainers whispered, "has something rare," but Lena never bragged. She just kept learning, faster, deeper, with more hunger. Because it wasn't about being known, it was about being prepared, if the sky ever called her again. At home, her mother kept a small box of news clippings, awards and letters from around the world, but she never forced Lena to look at them. She knew the real reward wasn't in gold or ink. It was in her daughter's growing confidence. The way she sat straighter, spoke clearer, dreamed wider. One night, as a light rain tapped against the windows, Lena sat with her mother in the kitchen. She stirred her tea and asked, "Mom, do you think I was chosen by accident?" Her mother looked at her surprised. "What do you mean?" Lena lowered her voice. "There were doctors, grown-ups, smart people on that plane. But no one else stepped up," her mom replied gently. "You did. That's not an accident, Lena. That's something special inside you." Lena stared at the steam rising from her cup and finally whispered, "I don't want to be famous." Her mother reached over and held her hand. "Then be useful," she said softly. "Be ready, be kind. Be brave like you already are." Years later, that same girl would walk across a graduation stage in a crisp uniform. Her name would be called, this time not as a survivor but as a certified pilot. Her dream had taken flight not because of a medal, but because of the fire lit by a single moment of courage. And even though she grew older and the world changed around her, one part of her stayed the same, her heart. Steady like the sky above, she often visited schools. Talking to children who felt invisible, she'd tell them, "The world may not see you today, but one day, it might need you more than anyone else." People often asked her, "Do you miss being a normal kid?" She'd smile and say, "I never stopped being one. I just listened when the sky whispered my name," because in the end, Lena's story wasn't about luck or attention. It was about a moment, a choice, a heartbeat of courage in a cabin filled with fear, and the voice of a young girl who said, "I can help," and did.